And Tyler, our resident Georgia fan, is now out on the chances, down on the chances of the Dogs making the playoffs. So my question to you guys and him as well, if they don't make it, who can make the playoffs? Or are you retracting that statement? Do you think Georgia can still make the playoffs or will make the playoffs?
Well, Georgia definitely still can. The thing is, I was very emotional after that loss to Alabama. Man, that was just a tough way to lose. You go down 28-0 and then 30-7, but then start to come back. You're still down 18 points in the fourth quarter. And I'm like, it's pretty much over. Next thing you know, we score a touchdown. Cool, get a quick stop because Alabama's still throwing the football. I mean, give them credit, I guess. But next thing you know, you're on top and you're feeling really, really good. Boom, Ryan Williams just stole the souls of me, Humphrey on that defensive play, as well as Bolden. Two younger DBs, though, which is something you could look at. But Ryan Williams is insane. He's 17 years old, 200 yards receiving, clearly the best game of his life against us. And, I have to eat my own crow on that because, remember, last week I said, I bet you he was going to be completely shut down. Boy, oh boy, was I wrong. So everyone can laugh at me at that. But with UGA, the schedule's tough. It's brutal. Georgia plays a total of probably 5 top 15 teams. Clemson, Alabama, those two, they went 1-1. At Texas in a couple of weeks, at Ole Miss and Tennessee back-to-back, at home against Tennessee. So the schedule is brutal for the Dogs. Sandwiched in the Florida game. Listen, I get it. Florida is a team that's, kind of a laughingstock right now, especially we'll talk about this later on. They play UCF. But that's a rivalry game. Georgia Tech's another rivalry game. Again, that one's at home, but still the last time Georgia lost to Georgia Tech was at home back in 2016, Kirby's first year. So, Georgia definitely has a shot. Now, are they a guarantee? No. That win against Clemson, though, is huge. We could look down the season if Clemson goes, let's say Georgia does go 10-2, they're in. But they end up going 9-3, let's say losing to Ole Miss, losing to Texas, both on the road, but beating Tennessee. Having that win against Clemson could be detrimental because I don't necessarily think that you could put Clemson above Georgia, especially with 2 losses. You kind of disagree with me. Georgia at 9-3. I feel like Georgia is going to go 9-3. I watched them in that first half. They look very, very bad. You said they would go 10-2. Regardless, if Georgia goes 10-2, they're in. 9-3, they're out. As simple as that. I think we both. Well, I think you would disagree with me on that because Georgia would have 2 top 15 wins more than likely. But at the same time, I don't know how a 9-3 SEC team could find themselves into the playoffs unless it's a 11 seed, I guess. But look at the other teams in the Big Ten, and as well as Clemson and Miami. If Clemson beats Miami in the ACC title, don't you think both of them would get in? And then you would have the 3 losses Georgia lost to. They would be ahead of Georgia. So for me, it's hard for me to see a 9-3 UGA in unless a lot more chaos starts to happen.
Yeah, so there is a weird scenario I just thought of. If Clemson somehow does lose another regular season game, but then beats Miami in the championship game, but Miami is undefeated at that point, and Georgia's 9-3, I'm putting Georgia at 9-3 over 1 loss to Miami. Miami's schedule is god awful. God awful. I don't care because to me, yes, they're 9-3, but if you put Miami up and they played the same schedule, I think they're 9-3 at best. Like, I don't think especially after watching that Virginia Tech game. Now, again, this is what I've seen so far, so that's what I have to judge on. I don't have, the crystal ball in my hand, able to rub it and look into the future and see how this looks. Now, if they go on a run and just dismantle teams like they should on that schedule, then I would change my mind. But if we're talking about a couple nail-biter wins in there versus that schedule, I personally believe Georgia should get in like 9-3 over an 11-1 Miami team. But again, I don't have the crystal ball, so I don't know. I do think another scenario too, like I just don't see how the Big Ten could get 4 teams in. And then in this scenario, that would really only put 3 SEC teams in, unless someone else pops up. But I have some teams written down. We can go through that in a second that could get in, I guess. But to me, I just don't see how the SEC, which is still the best conference in America, only gets 3 in, and the Big Ten would get 4 in this scenario, because the 4, in my opinion, would probably be Penn State, Oregon, Michigan, or USC, and then Ohio State. I think you would have to put a 4th team in the SEC, and if you're going to do that, I think it'd be a disservice to leave out a 4th team from the SEC. But so some of these teams and like that are in the mix, in my opinion, it would be Georgia, LSU, Ole Miss, A&M, and Missouri. Obviously, we both agree Missouri. Do we think they're going to make the playoffs? No. Do we think they're overrated? Yes. But could they? Yes, absolutely they could, because their schedule is very easy. And we'll get into the A&M and Missouri game later. But out of those teams I just mentioned, if you do take Georgia out of it, Tyler, who do you think would get in out of LSU, Ole Miss, A&M, and Missouri?
What I would – so if Georgia does lose that 3rd game, I personally believe it would be to Ole Miss, so I would put Ole Miss ahead of Georgia. They would be 10-2 more than likely. Let's say they run the table, I guess lose to LSU, and then beat Georgia. Yeah, Ole Miss would get in over Georgia. That's kind of who my 4th team was if Georgia were to go 9-3. I'm so close between 9-3 and 10-2 for UGA. It's this schedule is ridiculous. So, and you know, if Georgia first half Georgia plays anybody on the schedule, they might lose any game anywhere. Second half Georgia, like they did against Alabama, they could beat everyone on their schedule. But the problem with Georgia is they're a tale of 2 halves team. I don't understand how Georgia wasn't prepared in that first quarter. Really, what lost you the game was that first quarter. You gave up 21 points, and oh, by the way, Alabama's about to score again. So.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's kind of weird. The strategy, I actually kind of agreed with the strategy they used in the SEC championship game of spying Jalen Milroe. They did that more in the second half with 2 guys, and it seemed to work better because it forced him to stay in the pocket and throw more. And he's become a lot better passer. Like, that's pretty damn clear at this point. But is he still elite at it? No. But to me, what's surprising is Georgia's defensive line, to me, especially Michael Williams, has not been what he was brought up to be. Like, this guy has been talked about. Him and James Pierce, honestly, have not lived up to their billing. Like, at the beginning of the year, that they were talked about as number 1 picks coming out in the NFL draft. And right now, if you look at most mock drafts, like half of them don't even have them in the first round, either of those guys. So it's been like a complete disaster from those two. And obviously, Georgia's defensive line has suffered from that. And then also Warren Brinson being injured. Did he play in this game, by the way?
Yeah, he played.
So go ahead.
Here's the thing with Michael Williams. He was pretty good in the second half against Clemson, and then boom, Phil Maffa with that dirty hit. That's the difference in him, as his ankle is still injured. He didn't even look like he was 50%. He was barely out there in the second half, and to be honest, Georgia's defense had a little bit more success. But they ran that 3-3-5 all second half. That was kind of shocking to me. And it was working. You know, when you run that 3-3-5, have those 3 down linemen, but then you have the 2 spies. Georgia had 2 spies, which is crazy. To me, that's crazy, but it worked. And kind of didn't really make sense why Alabama wasn't trying to run the football a little bit more, especially when you're up. I mean, I get it. DeBoer's an air raid type of guy, but still, I mean, your offensive line was doing really, really well. So that was kind of a head scratcher, but it was working for us in the second half. So I can't really complain. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. They were averaging over 5 yards per carry on the game. So in my opinion, they should have kept with the running game, especially in the second half, obviously, like you said, with the lead. But the thing that it's kind of weird because it played out in 2 different halves. I said, did Georgia have enough playmakers to exploit this weakness of the Alabama team, which is the secondary? Well, guess what? In the first half, they didn't. In the second half, apparently they did. Because they hit a bunch of bomb shots down the field versus that Alabama secondary. And my question, and it will be answered throughout the season because these teams play very good competition going forward, is the Alabama secondary really that weak, or did Georgia actually find something with the playmakers down the field? So I don't know what the answer to that is right now because I didn't see it for a full game. I just saw it for a half. It's going to be interesting how those questions are answered going forward. But I will say this, the secondaries for both teams, honestly, have taken a step back from what we're used to. Like in Alabama, Georgia games of the past, you had like a ton of NFL talent, like first round guys running around back there. I like Starks at safety, but everyone else, I don't think there's a first-round pick anywhere back there for either of those teams. So that can be exploited, in my opinion. And then also, if Georgia's not going to get that pass rush, then it can definitely be exploited. But that's the thing I talked about on the Texas show yesterday is people have this idea of elite teams in their head, and every year that standard changes. There's more. Some years there's more elite teams. Other years there's less elite teams. Last year I thought we had like legitimately 5 to 6 elite teams. Right now I don't know if there's any like for sure elite teams. So it's going to be interesting if that number does jump up, or we're just in a down year all around in college football. And that happens, guys. This goes through cycles. I think COVID had a lot to do with it. And honestly, I have the schedules written down for these like playoff teams that I was considering. And A&M, to me, the schedule that they have, I don't really like the team as a whole, but they have a very manageable schedule, especially if they're able to get through Missouri this week. I mean, you have LSU at home. You have honestly, your 2 hardest games left after that are at South Carolina and Texas. If you can go 1-1 in those games and beat Missouri this week, there's a real chance at 10-2 you can make the playoff. You would be rooting at that point for Notre Dame to win out, because it would absolutely kill your chances if Notre Dame loses 1 or 2 more games, in my opinion, and that would be one of your losses on your schedule off of a semi-weak schedule. But A&M definitely has a shot. Honestly, if I'm ranking these teams by most likely, I think A&M is my most likely. If Georgia's not going to do it, I think A&M would take their spot, and then I would probably go LSU, Ole Miss, Missouri. I think Missouri for me has the least or the smallest shot out of the teams I mentioned in this out of the 4. I still think Georgia makes it right now. I still think it's going to be Alabama, Tennessee, Texas, and Georgia. I think I had 4 SEC teams. I didn't have Tennessee originally. I had Ole Miss instead of Tennessee. I'm just switching preseason wise. I'm just switching Tennessee for Ole Miss.
Yeah, and I actually disagree. If A&M actually has to hope Notre Dame doesn't have that same record, because if they have head-to-head record, then Notre Dame is in front of them. But with Texas A&M, they should have beaten Notre Dame, if we're being honest here. They had their chances. They had way too many chances against Notre Dame. Then they choked that one away. For me, this Missouri-Texas A&M game is almost kind of like an elimination game, as if Missouri, I'll say this, if Missouri's able to go on the road in College Station and beat Texas A&M, where are the 3 other losses? You can't find them. In my opinion, you can't find them. Maybe I think they play at South Carolina.
Yeah,
I know they play Oklahoma. And
South Carolina, by the way, that's my dark horse. Like, that defense is really damn good. Really damn good. And we'll get into that later too, but keep going with your point.
Yeah, it's just both teams have like legitimately easier schedules. A&M's is slightly tougher in my opinion, but yeah, that's kind of like an elimination game. It is for A&M, because if they lose this game, they're not going to run the table, go 10-2. I'm sorry, I just don't see that happening. They own South Carolina. Give them credit. They do own South Carolina, or something like 10-1 or 11-1 versus South Carolina since they joined the SEC. And then I'm trying to think what other, obviously the Texas game, that's the game that's a huge game, because as of right now, that looks like, A&M's going to come into that game probably 8-3, maybe 9-2, and then Texas 11-0 or 10-1. But that's a rivalry game. It's renewed. It hasn't been played since 2011. This was one of the most hyped games in all of college football in the preseason, and it still is. It has every chance to be as good, maybe better, because I do think Texas A&M is slightly better than what people thought, and that comes due to that offensive line, I think. Defensively, they're really, really good. But, yeah, if Missouri is able to go on the road in College Station, I'm not going to say they're a lock, but I certainly can't find 3 more losses.
Yeah, honestly, if they would have started the right quarterback from the beginning, they probably would have beat Notre Dame. So they definitely found the solution there. I mean, Marcel Reed has yet to turn the ball over. He has a better yards per attempt. He has a better accuracy. Like, he's better at literally everything than Connor Wegman. So it was the right decision there for them to go with him. And then Dareal, I know you're high on Kentucky, my friend, but Kentucky is not making the playoff. They're a good football team. They are. I had them at 8-4 going into the season. I think they can get that mark, but 8-4 and 9-3 is not getting you in the playoffs. So they basically have to play perfect football from here on out. I just don't see that happening because they still have a decently hard schedule going forward. I know they got to play Texas. And actually, guess what? In the preseason, I had Kentucky beating Texas. That was Texas' one loss because I really like your guys' defensive line, and that's proven to be definitely the strength of that football team. But I just don't see it. Brock Vandegrift is way too limited to me. He's just way too limited in the passing game.
Yeah, and they kind of already got their fluke win. Now, I will say this. They had their fluke loss against South Carolina anyway. They're a better team than South Carolina, at least in my opinion. Brock Vandegrift had the worst game of his life and probably any other quarterback's life of all time in that game. So he's starting to feel more comfortable. That was a huge win, though, for Kentucky. It was kind of Kentucky was going to win one of these flukish games because they just had one of their flukiest losses. If you go back to last year, they had a lot of closer games too. That's just kind of who Mark Stoops is. But they really run. They really chew that clock. They limit possessions, and they're a very physical team. So they're a tough go for pretty much everybody. I guess that's what we learned this weekend too.
Yeah, the problem I see with them, I call them the Michigan of the SEC. They have such a small lane to drive in because if they don't convert third downs and they don't convert in the red zone, they're going to get, like I said, one of these games that's going to happen. You don't do either of those things, and you're going to get destroyed. Like, it's not even going to be close. That's what's going to happen because they have to win time of possession and they have to hold on to the football. You saw that versus Ole Miss. I think at one point it was like 41 minutes to like 14 minutes or something. It was something absurd. And that's like that. Your only way you can win football games is it's just not going to happen week in, week out. One of these weeks, it's going to go horribly wrong and you're going to get killed.
Yeah. Like the South Carolina game. That's literally exactly how that went.
Yeah. And that's why I think, like, it's going to happen again. It's too long of a season. You play too hard of a schedule. It's just going to happen again. Fluke win. We have been the best defense in America. I agree. Up until this point, you probably have been one. I'm not going to say the best, but you've been one of the best defenses. Kentucky almost beat Georgia. We'll just keep winning and keep doubting. The thing is, Dareal, you have 7 teams in the playoff right now. That's just not going to happen from the SEC because you're going to have at least 3 from the Big Ten. And then I think, that's 13 because 7, 3, and then you have the 2 conference winners. You're going to have the other outside shot too. So that's 13 teams. That's not possible.
Yeah.
Like 6 is the absolute most.
I mean, it was a fluke win. I hate to be like that. I don't want to be mean over here, but it was a fluke win. You had the ball 45 minutes to their 15. Ole Miss scored 17 points. They won't play another game in which they score 17 points. Not even Georgia. Georgia will give up points. I'm pretty worried about playing Ole Miss, especially now when all the pressure's on Georgia and Ole Miss because they both have losses early on into the season. Yeah, and that's right before we play Tennessee too. So it's a tough situation. But, yeah, that was pretty much a fluke win. That 4th down in 10 in which Brock Vandegrift threw a prayer to Baron Brown. I mean, hey, I love Baron Brown. I think he's one of the best wide receivers in the SEC. He could, if he was just about anywhere else, no offense, he would be probably in the top 10. He has that talent. He's Kentucky's most talented wide receiver I've seen in a long time. But come on,